forest region of Africa, a handsome young palm wine tapper returned to his village after a long sojourn and stood on the outskirts of town, mouth agape. This was not the village he had left many years ago. Karumbi looked like a dry, arid wasteland, and not the green and fertile land he remembered. Slowly, he made his way through town, stunned at the changes. The villagers looked sad, gaunt and emaciated. Even the animals looked hungry and defeated, their bellies hollow and ribs showing. As he made his way to his uncle's house, he paused to stare in wonder, as in front of him was a vast compound, quite unlike anywhere else in the village. It was lush and green, with tall trees containing ripe fruits that reached into the heavens. He saw mango trees, banana trees, palm trees, and much more. As he stared, dark clouds gathered, and soon it started to rain, but bizarrely, only on the compound, the land where he stood, and the rest of the village did not see a drop of rain. Confused, he continued to his uncle's house. "Akande, you are back!" His uncle Atamba exclaimed and hugged the young man. They talked excitedly for a while, catching up. But then Akande asked the question that was on the tip of his tongue. "Uncle, what is happening? When I left Karumbi, it was lush and green and fertile, where you could grow anything. Now it's like a desert, except for that compound, by the village square." Atamba sighed sadly. "Sit down and let me tell you what happened." Atamba told a very strange tale to Akande. A few years after Akande had left Karumbi, Akambi, the wise old king of the village, had been pondering on a problem that had long troubled him. Karumbi indeed was a very fertile land, where you could hardly go 2 days without rainfall. It rained so much in Karumbi, there was a saying that went, instead of a wet and dry season, Karumbi had a wet and wetter season. Plants, vegetables, fruits, and other crops were plentiful, and Karumbi produced so much food they could afford to sell to other villages and still have more than enough for themselves. However, with every good came some bad. Because of the plentiful rainfall, the people of Karumbi found it very difficult to have outdoor ceremonies. You would plan for a wedding, spend money on food, a music band, matching Asho Ebi, and much more. Then the rains would come and ruin it. You would want to bury your father, make elaborate arrangements, and the heavens would open, spoiling everything. King Akambi was troubled. He was thankful for the rains, but yet his people were always complaining that they were not able to do any outdoor activities. There must be a solution, he thought. One day, he sent an emissary, headed by Atamba, out to go far and wide to look for a skilled rainmaker. The emissary traveled a long distance, going from village to village, looking for someone that would solve Karumbi's peculiar problem. They finally got to a village and met an old man who was reputed to be a skilled rainmaker. "Good afternoon from Akambi of Karumbi," Atamba said. "We require a skilled rainmaker to come to our land. The king will richly reward you if you agree." The old man, whose name was Muojo, regarded the men from Karumbi. This was a great opportunity, as he was one of many rainmakers in his village, and he could make a whole lot of money for himself and his teenage daughter, Arike, elsewhere. But then he frowned. Karumbi? He had heard of that village somewhere. Is that not the village where young maidens are sacrificed to a deity that resides in a calabash? He asked. Oh, that was a long time ago, before Akambi came to the throne. Yes, it is true that the deity demands a maiden every year, but Akambi had the idea of carving a wooden female figure and presenting it to Dagbororu. Thankfully, it seems not to matter if it is a human female or a wooden female. Dagbororu is appeased. Muojo bit his lip in thought. Arike was all he had. Her mother had died in childbirth, and he had raised her all alone. She was his world, and he would never put her life in danger. I will accept your offer, but only if you swear an oath that no girl will be sacrificed to Dagbororu while I am in Karumbi. Atamba smiled. He had no problem swearing, for all he said was the truth. I swear that for as long as you are in the village, your daughter will not be given to the calabash deity Dagbororu. Satisfied, Muojo packed his belongings and relocated to Karumbi with Arike, his daughter. The first outdoor ceremony was King Akambi's grandson's naming ceremony. This will be a great test, Muojo, King Akambi said. He purposely delayed the ceremony for the wettest period of the year, a time known for heavy and angry rains and winds that moved roofs and other objects here and there. Akambi left no stone unturned in preparation for the ceremony. The best food was prepared, the most sumptuous palm wine was procured, the best musical ensemble was booked, and the whole village was invited. The whole of Karumbi was excited, but confused. Why had King Akambi fixed the ceremony for the wettest period of the year? On the day of the naming ceremony, dark clouds gathered ominously, the winds howled, and the smell of rain was heavy in the air. "Ha, Muojo," Akambi said, his brow creased with worry. "This rain will ruin my ceremony, and I will be shamed in front of all." Muojo smiled. "My king, this is a small rain compared to what I have dealt with. Continue with your plans and disregard the clouds. This rain has been held. It might fall in the heavens, but not in Karumbi." So they started with the ceremonies, and true to Muojo's words, the winds ceased howling, the clouds disappeared, a rainbow appeared, followed by bright sunshine. Not one drop of rain fell, and the ceremony was a resounding success. That was the start of Muojo's booming Rainmaker business in Karumbi. Anytime anyone wanted to have a ceremony, they would visit Baba Muojo, pay him a small sum, and they were guaranteed that the rain would be held for the duration of the ceremony. It was indeed a remarkable thing to behold. As soon as the ceremony had ended and the last reveler was gone, the heavens would open up and rain would fall. Muojo was extremely happy. His daughter Arike was now a most beautiful young maiden. His business was thriving, and the people of Karumbi accorded him with the utmost respect. A few years later, however, all changed. Old King Akambi died and was succeeded by his son, Bamiwi. Bamiwi was as dull as Akambi wise, as wicked as Akambi kind-hearted, and as greedy as Akambi was selfless. While Akambi ruled with love and respect, Bamiwi wielded a heavy hand. When he walked through the village, all were expected to grovel before him. He would go to the market and take whatever he wanted: food, clothes, jewelry, without payment. Every day, someone was being whipped in the village square for some minor transgression. Indeed, it seemed watching people being whipped was Bamiwi's second favorite pastime. His favorite was taking women away from their husbands. He had several wives and concubines, but he was never satisfied. Anytime he was out and about and saw a young girl, he would proposition her. "Beautiful damsel, today is your lucky day, as you have caught my eye. Leave your family or your husband. It matters not to me, and follow me, as you are the latest addition to my harem." One day, Bamiwi sighted Arike, the Rainmaker's daughter, and was enchanted by her beauty. "So there's an angel like this in Karumbi, and she is not in my palace?" Bamiwi was with his palace guards, and Atamba his trusted advisor. "That is Arike, Muojo's daughter," Atamba said. "He has immunity in the land, I know of another girl whose beauty exceeds hers. Let me get her for you." Bamiwi looked sharply at Atamba. "Immunity in my kingdom? Who says?" "This is an instruction from your father, sire. Let me find 3 of such women for you. Next to them, Arike will look like a toad." "Rubbish!" Bamiwi thundered. "Tell Muojo that I want to see himself and Arike in the palace tonight." That night, Arike cried her eyes out. She had heard that the king desired her, and she was frightened. Bamiwi was notoriously wicked, and she wanted no parts of him. "Do not worry, my daughter," Muojo said. "King Akambi, Bamiwi's father, swore an oath many years ago that as long as I was in this village, no harm will befall you. We will go to King Bamiwi and explain this to him. I am sure he will understand." Later on that day, Muojo and Arike were presented to Bamiwi in his throne room. "It is your lucky day. Muojo, as your daughter, is to become a princess. Just let me know what the bride price is, and let's get it over with," Bamiwi said. "My lord, thank you for your generous offer, but Arike is not ready for marriage and would respectively decline to be your wife." Bamiwi looked down at the old man and his daughter for what seemed an eternity, scarcely able to believe what he heard. "Muojo, it seems you misunderstand me. This is not a request, but a command. Your daughter, Arike, is to be my wife." Muojo stared at the king, a determined look on his lined old face. "When I was brought here, I made myself clear on the terms and conditions." He turned to Arike, who was kneeling beside him. "Or do you want to marry the king?" "No," she said in a small voice. "We do not force women into unions in our family. Come, Arike." He stood up, beckoning to his daughter. "Let us go home." That night was hot in the palace. Bamiwi raged at everyone within earshot. His courtiers, his advisors, and most especially Atamba. "You allow that wretched old man to insult me? I am the god's representative on earth. I am the god of this kingdom." Atamba and the other courtiers trembled, for Bamiwi was unpredictable when angry. "My lord, see what I have for you. It will make you forget that you ever laid eyes on Arike," Atamba said, clapping his hands. 3 beautiful damsels walked into the throne room and stood before Bamiwi. Atamba, who was a wise old man, had foreseen how things would go and had scoured the village for replacements for Arike. "Remove these witches from my sight. It is Muojo's daughter that I want, and it is she that I will have." Atamba's heart jumped into his mouth. Bamiwi pointed to 3 of his palace guards. "Go to Muojo's house and bring Arike to me." Atamba was aghast. "My lord, he is a guest in Karumbi. You cannot do that, I beg of you. If I hear another word from your mouth again, I will have you whipped like a dog. Now go!" The palace guards burst into Muojo's house and dragged Arike out. Muojo, who was a frail old man, could only look on powerlessly. Arike was presented to Bamiwi in his throne room. "Nobody dares go against my word," he said, regarding the crying girl coldly. "From now on, you are my wife. Now take her to her room." Arike was taken to a lavishly furnished room and locked up. She cried all night and swore that she would never agree to be the wife of such a cruel man. The next morning, a regal old woman came to her and coerced her to take a bath. Afterwards, some servants came and presented her with a grand breakfast, but she refused to eat. The old woman reported Arike to Bamiwi. "She refuses to eat, my lord. She says she would rather die than marry you." This became a familiar pattern over the next few days. King Bamiwi would send one of his people to talk sense into Arike, and they would fail. Bamiwi became increasingly frustrated, and the more Arike resisted, the angrier he grew. One day, he confronted her. "You arrogant little gutter rat! Rather than being happy that a king wants to marry you, you defy me!" he shouted angrily. Arike looked up weakly, as she had not eaten for several days. "I would rather die than marry a brute like you," she said, and turned away from him. Bamiwi was stunned. Nobody had ever dared to talk to him like that. He raised up his hand to strike her, but Atamba stopped him. "My lord, do not lower yourself by beating her. Let me deal with her." "Well, I see we have a stubborn little goat," King Bamiwi finally said. "Goats are not meant to stay in palaces. Take her to jail. Perhaps when she spends some time behind bars, she will come to her senses." Arike was thrown into a small, dirty prison. She cried all day and refused food and water. Finally, she fell asleep, and in her dream, she heard her father's voice calling her softly, "Arike, Arike, wake up!" Slowly, she realized that it wasn't a dream. Her father was with her. They both clung tearfully to each other through the prison bars. "Arik, my daughter, you were always a strong-willed girl, but this, I fear, is a fight that you cannot win. I implore you to agree to the king's wishes. There are worse things than living in a palace as a queen." Arike looked at her father sadly. "I cannot do it. My spirit will not allow it." Muojo inhaled sharply. His daughter was just like her mother. They both had an unshakable spirit. He spent the next few minutes begging her, but she would not yield. "If it is my fate to die in this place, then so be it. I cannot be a wife to such an evil man." Muojo left the prison dejected. He requested an audience with the king. When he got in front of Bamiwi, he prostrated and begged for mercy. Bamiwi checked his fingernails nonchalantly. "I don't know why this has to be so difficult," he said. "All I want is for her to yield to me, to acknowledge me as her husband, and then she can have the world. Won't you make her see sense?" "I have tried, sire, but she is not like most girls. She is special. I beg of you, release her. Her spirit is strong, and anyone that wrongs her endangers themselves." Bamiwi laughed evilly. "I see that father and daughter drink from the same stream of madness. We will see how strong her spirit really is after she spends a few weeks in jail." Bamiwi soon found out that Arike had an unshakable spirit. Every day, Bamiwi would send someone to ask her if she was ready to be the king's wife, and every day she would shake her head. Muojo lobbied Atamba as hard as he could to get her released, but the king would not budge. Days turned into weeks, and a strange thing was happening. Even though Arike had not had anything to eat and very little to drink, a strange calm cloaked her, and she grew more radiant and beautiful. One day, Bamiwi went to see her and was enraged at how healthy she looked. He screamed and ranted like a demented man. "Who has been sneaking her food? I will have all your heads." His guards quaked before him. "Nobody has, my lord. She must be a witch, for she grows more radiant in the worst of conditions." "Leave them alone, Bamiwi," Arike said, her face serene. "Not a morsel of food or a drop of water has passed my lips in days." The king was stunned at Arike's impertinence. He was so angry his whole body shook, and he could think of no words, so he turned and stormed off. That evening, Bamiwi called his most trusted advisors. "The festival of Dagbororu, the calabash deity, is almost upon us," he said. "How are the preparations coming along?" Atamba, who was in charge, updated the king. "Our sculptor has finished the female statue to be offered to the deity. Would you like to see it?" "There will be no need for that this year. I think we should go back to our old ways and offer a maiden. The court fell into a stunned silence. "You mean a human?" Atamba said. "Yes. Henceforth, we will revert to offering maidens for Dagbororu, and I have the perfect candidate, Arike, Muojo's daughter." The court rumbled in uproar. Atamba could not believe his ears. "My lord, we cannot do that." "And why not?" Bamiwi said. "Your father—" Bamiwi stood up and shouted, "My father is dead. I am the king now, and as I have spoken, so shall it be." On the night of the festival of Dagbororu, Arike was dragged out of her cell and forced to wear a white gown. She was blindfolded and taken into a forest far from the village. She didn't know yet, but a terrible fate awaited her. Her blindfold was removed, and before her were several men, all in white robes. They were in a forest clearing, and the leader of the men carried a large calabash. 2 guards bound her hands and stood behind her. The ceremony summoning Dagbororu had started. The chief priest spoke some incantations and performed rituals. He placed the calabash on the floor and stepped back. In unison, the devotees of Dagbororu started chanting in a strange monotone. The calabash began vibrating, and a yellow light enveloped it, and then it rose and started floating upwards. It reached a great height, and then a monstrous figure emerged from it and floated downwards. The deity Dagbororu was a monster of a man. He had shoulders the size of a boulder. He was immensely muscular, with arms and legs like an iroko tree. His head was huge, and his facial features so misshapen, he was more beast than man. "The great Dagbororu, Karumbi honors you. See what we have for you, a chaste and beautiful maiden. Accept our gift, Dagbororu, and spare us until you next shall come." Slowly, Dagbororu moved towards Arike, who stood shaking like a leaf. Quietly, he inspected her, like a housewife carefully checking goods she had purchased in the market. Finally, it spoke. "I am pleased with her." The voice seemed to echo out of nothingness. Arike suddenly fainted, and the devotees cheered. "It has been successful," the chief priest said, and they all watched with bated breaths as Dagbororu floated up until it reached its calabash, which seemed to be in the heavens, and disappeared within. The ceremony was over. The devotees gathered their paraphernalia and left the forest clearing, leaving Arike laying on the floor. As soon as they had gone, Muojo stepped out of hiding. Tearfully, he lifted his daughter, and with the help of a servant, they carried her home. Dagbororu was a deity that had no use for physical form. What he wanted was the spirit. He had kidnapped Arike's spirit, leaving a lifeless body. Muojo did not sleep that night. He tried to wake Arike up, but it was all in vain. It seemed that she was in a deep coma. The following morning, Muojo went to see Atamba. "Thank you for telling me where to get my daughter, but she will not wake," he said frantically. "That is what happens. The deity has taken her soul. The body is but a carcass," Atamba replied. "I am sorry, Rainmaker. You might as well bury her. She will never wake." Muojo wiped his eyes and got up. "Before you go, it hasn't rained for a few days, which is very unusual in our town. You wouldn't have anything to do with this, would you?" Atamba said. Muojo's eyes suddenly narrowed. "The child that says its mother will not sleep will also know no sleep," he said hoarsely. "As you have taken my daughter, I have taken rain. As long as my child remains lifeless, I swear not one drop of rain will fall on Karumbi." The days turned to weeks, and the weeks to months, and most of Karumbi knew no rain. Most of Karumbi except one place, the Rainmaker, Muojo's vast compound. It was the most bizarre sight to see. The villagers would gather in awe, looking at heavy rainfall falling on Mu Ojo's vast compound, while the rest of the town remained completely dry. It was as if a giant umbrella in the sky covered all of Karumbi, except the Rainmaker's compound. Karumbi slowly became an arid wasteland. Nothing could grow, crops failed, and fertile land slowly turned to desert. Hunger became the villagers' daily companion. Imagine yourself an eagle soaring high above Karumbi. You would find it an arid desert wasteland, except for one small portion, Rainmaker Mu Ojo's compound, which was lush, green, and teeming with plants, vegetables, fruits, tubers, and other crops. The villagers became irate. An angry crowd gathered around the King Bamiwi's palace, demanding something be done about the state of affairs. How can it be that only one man had all the food and the rest of the village starved? They raged. "Have you gone to him?" King Bamiwi demanded of Atamba angrily. "Many times, and his answer is always the same. He will release the rains when Dagboru releases his daughter." "But that is impossible," the high priest of Dagboru exclaims. "The deity has never been known to release a maiden." "The people are starving," another said. "Something must be done." There was a loud clamor in the room as the palace court discussed the issue. King Bamiwi spoke up. "Atamba, take some of my guards and enter his compound. Dispose of him and take over his farm." Atamba peered at his king. What had they done to deserve such a crude and stupid ruler, he thought. Even if we dispose of him, it won't solve anything. The rains will never come, and we will eventually finish the food in his compound. "You dare disobey me?" Bamiwi yelled, rising from his throne. "I say go and take over his compound immediately." Mu Ojo was on his veranda when he saw the Atamba and the palace guards marching down the footpath. He said nothing as he watched them break down his gate. The men gasped as they saw how rich the compound was. There was yam, corn, cocoyam, cassava, rice, oranges, pears, plantain, and all other manner of edibles, enough to feed the village many times over. "Mu Ojo," Atamba yelled up at him. "Please give yourself up. We can settle this amicably." Mu Ojo came down and stood before Atamba. "Are you ready to tell Dagbororu to release my daughter?" he asked. The leader of the palace guard, who was an impatient man, sneered. "Enough of this. Seize him." No sooner had the words left his lips than the heavens opened up. A violent storm began, accompanied by lightning and thunder. Atamba and the guards were hit by a deluge so heavy the raindrops felt like pebbles striking their face. In all of this, the ground where Mu Ojo stood was completely dry and untouched. "When you are ready to release my daughter, we can talk," Mu Ojo said, walking calmly back into his house. Atamba and the guards stumbled out of Mu Ojo's compound, falling over themselves and screaming in pain as the rain pelted them. They would run under a shade, but the rain would follow them. They entered their houses, but the rain followed. In desperation, they ran to the palace, but even then, the rain beat them right there in the throne room. Bamiwi, frightened, chased them away and retreated to an inner chamber. After a few hours of being beaten by the rain wherever they went, it finally stopped. Never again did anybody dare go to Mu Ojo's house. And that's how famine came into the land, Atamba said, finishing his tale to Akande. Akande, the palm wine tapper, listened to the story in astonishment. "But why can't anybody release Arike from Dagbororu's clutches?" he asked. Atamba regarded him. "Have you so quickly forgotten? Dagbororu is a powerful deity. None can do it. What if I can do it? The palm wine tapper said. What would be my reward? Atamba smiled. Do not bother yourself with the affairs of this cursed village. Just regain your strength and be on your way. This is no longer the Karumbi you knew. Akande the palm wine tapper persisted for Yusi, as well as being the best palm wine tapper in the world. He was a man that had inherited many powerful charms from his grandfather. I have a plan, he said. During the next Dagbororu sacrifice, I will dress as a woman, and I will be taken with Dagbororu. When I get to his domain, I am sure I will be able to rescue Arike. Akande proposed. Atampa was dubious, but as there were no better ideas, he agreed to help. It was a strange woman who was to be Dagbororu's next victim. She was tall and broad-shouldered and was dressed in a white flowing gown and veil that covered all but her eyes. The high priest started his incantations, and soon the calabash descended from the heavens as if held by an invincible string. Dagbororu appeared and sniffed around the maiden curiously. Atampa held his breath. Would he accept Akande? Finally, the high priest smiled. She has been accepted. He is very pleased that we have presented such a sturdy maiden this time around, as there is much work to be done in his household. Like always, Dagbororu returned to his calabash with Akande's spirit. They journeyed for a short while in the heavens, and suddenly the calabash stopped. Dagbororu carried Akande and floated to the ground, landing in a huge compound. Akande's eyes widened as he saw several maidens all doing various house chores around the compound. One was washing clothes, another was picking stones from bins, yet another was sweeping the floor, and a couple were mending the roof to a huge, colorful mud hut. Everywhere he looked, maidens were hard at work, their faces sad and shoulders slumped. Dagbororu turned to Akande. His voice was a mix between animal and human. You are to pound yam. You wake up in the morning and pound. You pound in the afternoon, you pound at night, then on to the next day. Your name will be Miss Yam Pounder. With that, he walked off and entered the hut. The other maidens looked at him curiously as he made a strange-looking woman. Suddenly, 3 items floated to him and circled around him: a horsewhip, a mortar, and a pestle. Hey, Yam Pounder, why are you looking like you haven't been in a spirit realm before? Akande looked around for who spoke, and to his surprise, it was the horsewhip. The yam is there, said the mortar, buzzing around here and there like an agitated wasp. Get pounding. Our Lord will be hungry soon. This is a good specimen, Pestle said, floating around Akande's broad shoulders. Those are yam-pounding arms if I ever did see one. They all started laughing. So Akande started to pound yam. He pounded and pounded until all his body ached. Whenever he wanted to rest, Mr. Horsewhip, for that was what the maidens all called him, would recoil himself and give him a hard smack on his back. Work it! Back to work, lazy yam pounder. You aren't here on a holiday. Mortar and Pestle would laugh shrilly. Up and down, Pestle said, as Akande used him to pound the yam into a dough. Faster, faster, Mortar would say. Hit me harder, master needs his food. Finally, Akande was done. He surveyed his work exhausted. There was enough pounded yam to feed a village. Suddenly, he heard the whip cracking, "Twack!" and a young maiden yelped in pain. Come on, soup maker, where's the okra soup? Akande's eyes widened. The woman who was the soup maker was exceedingly beautiful. Floating before her was a basin of okra that was large enough to drown a cow. The basin landed in front of the yam he had pounded, and in unison, horsewhip, pestle, mortar, basin, broom, and other assorted non-living items said, Lord Master Dagbororu, your dinner is ready. Dagbororu emerged from the hut, stretching his big body. He walked to his dinner and started eating. He must have finished 1,000 wraps of pounded yam, for he had a voracious appetite. He let out a fart that sounded like thunder and a belch that startled the little creatures of the woods. "Very good," he said, getting up. He regarded Akande. "Miss Yam Pounder is a hard worker." With that, he went into his hut. Akande and the maidens collapsed exhausted. Laying by his side was the beautiful okra soup maker. "I am looking for a girl called Arike," he said, panting. The pretty girl looked startled. "Don't call me that name. My name here is Miss Okra Soup Maker." She looked around her frightened. "Every non-living thing here serves Dagbororu. If they hear you call me that name, Mr. Horsewhip will beat us both." Akande took it in quietly. He had never been this tired in his life, even on the worst day of palm wine tapping. It hadn't been this bad, but at least he had found Arike. "Okay, okra soup maker, your father sent me to find you," he said. "Twack!" Mr. Horsewhip cracked, and Akande yelled in pain. "No talking, get some rest. You will need your energy for yam pounding tomorrow." Arike looked at him after Mr. Horsewhip had floated away. "We need to be careful," she said underneath her breath. "This is a terrible place. All we do is walk. There's no escape as the walls have ears. I'm afraid that you have made a mistake coming here. Mr. Pestle and Mrs. Broom, and Master Whistle in particular, never sleep. They are better than 100 guard dogs." Early the next day, the maiden started work. Dagbororu was a deity with OCD, and he insisted his compound was spotless. Broom sweeper swept, roofers roofed, floor washers washed, laundry woman tended to clothes. Arike did nothing but make okra soup, and Akande pounded yam like his life depended on it. He pounded and pounded until his muscles screamed. "Gibam! Gibam! Gibam" was all you heard as he crushed yam into dough. Anytime he tried to rest, Mr. Mortar and Miss Pestle would call Mr. Horsewhip's attention, and he would get a good few hot strokes. Mr. Horsewhip was a sadist. He liked nothing better than floating around, whipping the maidens that slacked. "Back to work, you lazy so-and-sos. You haven't come here for sightseeing," he would say, and flick himself and finding someone's back. Dagbororu came up for breakfast and finished 2,000 wraps of pounded yam accompanied with okra soup that could fill a small lake. As he retreated into his hut, the maidens all collapsed on the floor, exhausted. On the evening of the third day, Akande screwed up his courage and spoke quietly, but loudly enough for Dagbororu to hear. "Imagine someone eating pounded yam without palm wine." Dagbororu was in the middle of stuffing his mouth with a mound of pounded yam the size of a baby's head when he froze. He put down the yam dough back on his plate and said angrily, "Who said that?" It was Yam Pounder, Mortar and Pestle, the two worst tattletales you could ever meet, said. Dagbororu's huge red eyes narrowed. "Come here. What did you say?" Akande bowed before Dagbororu. "I am sorry, my lord. It is just that pounded yam will never rest well in the stomach if it isn't washed down by sweet palm wine. Didn't you know this?" The maidens gasped. Even the non-living items were surprised at Miss Yam Pounder's effrontery. "And what is palm wine?" Dagbororu asked, frowning. "It is a sweet alcoholic beverage obtained from the palm tree," Horsewhip said, beating Akande to it. Apart from being a sadist, Horsewhip was a know-it-all. He couldn't resist showing off his knowledge. "And you couldn't tell me of this all this while?" Dagbororu said angrily. Mr. Horsewhip recoiled. "It doesn't grow here, my lord. It only grows in the land of man." It doesn't grow here because you don't have seeds, Akande said. He reached into his pocket and brought out a handful of seeds. I can get some for you now. I was an expert tapper in the land of humans. Well, what are you waiting for? Dagbororu shouted. Get me some of this palm wine stuff, and it had better be as good as advertised, as you have ruined my appetite. Akande nodded. He went to the edge of the clearing and said some incantations to the seeds. He planted the seeds and stepped back. Like magic, the earth parted and a palm wine tree sprouted. In a few minutes, it was a fully grown tree towering into the sky. They all watched as he climbed up the tree as easily as some would walk on earth. After a few minutes, he climbed down and handed Dagbororu a gourd of sweet juice. Dagbororu drank the whole gourd in 2 gulps. He had never tasted anything so sweet. This is delicious, he said, letting out a loud belch. From now on, you are no longer Yam Pounder, but Miss Palm Wine Tapper. Get me more of it. I would love to, but where would we store it? Akande said coyly. What do you mean? Dagbororu said. There's plenty of space in the compound. Palm wine must be stored indoors. They will spoil if kept outside, and I must be there to make sure they don't curdle and spoil. This was of course a stone-cold lie, but Dagbororu was not to know this. Well, store them in my hut then. I want 5,000 gourds daily. My lord is that wise? Horsewhip protested. No human is allowed in the hut. Shut up, Mr. Horsewhip. Quick, palm wine tapper, to work. Akande got to work. He tapped and tapped until he nearly dropped from exhaustion. But finally, he got his 5,000 gourds of palm wine. The gourds floated into the massive hut, and he followed them slowly. Dagbororu's hut was sparkling clean. There was a massive bed in one corner, and some wooden furniture. Immediately, Dagbororu started drinking. He drank and drank until he was quite drunk. Then he started singing a medley. Tomorrow, I will have another 5,000 cups, he said in between hiccups. Make sure the rest don't spoil, or I will get Mr. Horsewhip to flog you. Akande smiled. Have some more, my lord. Dagbororu was down to his last 50 gourds. Can I ask a question, lord? Akande asked, pretending to be tending the palm wine. Usually Dagbororu had no time for niceties, but the sweet palm wine had put him in a jolly mood. Of course, Miss Palm Wine Tapper. I noticed the calabash that we traveled in is still high in the sky. Why is that? Oh, that. Well, that is the source of my power. If it ever shatters, I am doomed. It is high in the sky, so none of you humans can get to it. Akande hid a triumphant look and pretended to fan the palm wine. Now, why was Dagbororu being so loose-lipped, you might ask? Remember that until recently, he had been a teetotaler deity, and as we all know, palm wine loosens tongues, especially for a novice drinker. Akande left the hut, his mind working on a plan. The calabash must be shattered. Floating around him was Mr. Horsewhip and Mr. Whistle. Don't even think of doing anything funny, Miss Palm Wine Tapper. Mr. Whistle and I will be watching you. Akande ignored them and lay down. All the maidens were tired from work and were sleeping. He was exhausted, but forced himself to stay awake. Soon he heard loud snoring from the hut. Dagbororu was in a drunken sleep. His face creased into a smile. Just to make sure Dagbororu would not wake, he had slipped a powerful sleeping potion into the wine. Slowly, he got up. Where do you think you are going? Mr. Broom said, buzzing around him like a fly. Mr. Horsewhip, wake up! Palm Wine Tapper is up to something funny, Mrs. Pestle said. Mr. Whistle started whistling loudly. All the maidens woke up alarmed. What was going on? Akande ignored them all and walked to a point. Looking up, he saw the calabash in the moonlight, floating in the sky. Thwack! Mr. Horsewhip beat Akande on the back. Mr. Pestle knocked his knees repeatedly. Akande grimaced, but continued determinedly. By now, all the non-living things that work for Dagbororu were alerted, and they made a loud enough noise to wake the dead. Mr. Whistle whistled shrilly, "Pee! Pee! Pee!" Mr. Talking Drum drummed. Mr. Trumpet trumpeted. The maidens were all awake, but Dagbororu would not wake. Quickly, Akande planted some of his magic seeds, and soon a palm tree grew high into the sky. "Oh no!" Horsewhip shouted, guessing Akande's intention. "He is after the calabash! Mr. Pestle, stop him!" Akande climbed the palm tree quickly. Mr. Horsewhip and the rest of the non-living things looked up in despair. None could follow except Mr. Pestle. As he climbed, Mr. Pestle hit him, trying to make him fall, but Akande was determined. Finally, he was high enough to see the calabash. He hit it with his fist, but it would not break. No matter how hard he tried, the calabash was solid as a rock. "You diabolical human," Mr. Pestle said. "You wicked human! How my lord awakens! You are not long for this earth." Akande looked down, and to his horror, he could see Dagbororu climbing the palm tree. Again he tried, but again the calabash would not break. Dagbororu was making progress. It was now or never. Suddenly he had an idea. He grabbed the annoying Mr. Pestle. Swinging with all his might, he hit the calabash, and it instantly shattered. A loud noise, like 1,000 pans falling sound, and the ground began to shake. Dagbororu yelled loudly, "Ha! I am doomed! I have drunk myself into damnation!" Suddenly all the humans fainted. Akande, Arike, and the other maidens fell into a heavy sleep. Arike woke up to see her father sleeping beside her. "Father," she said. Muojo woke up with his eyes wide. "Arike, you are awake?" Father and daughter hugged each other, crying and laughing at the same time. Akande also woke up suddenly. He stumbled out of his room and found Atamba in the living room. "Akande, you are back?" Akande smiled. "Yes, I have killed Dagbororu." One by one, the slumbering maidens in Karumbi woke up. The spell had been broken. Some had been asleep for 10 years, others a few years. There was much rejoicing that night, and soon the village square was full, as joyous families of the sleeping maidens and others gathered for news of what had happened. Atamba climbed a small stage and spoke loudly. "This is a joyous occasion, as our son, Akande, has defied the odds by bringing back our daughters and slaying Dagbororu." He beckoned to Akande and asked him to tell his story. A beaming Akande told the villagers everything, how he had disguised as a woman and how Dagbororu was nothing but a hungry slave driver deity, not worthy to be worshipped, and how he had bested him with palm wine. By the end of the story, some of the villagers carried him on their shoulders, cheering wildly. Then someone said, "Is that rain?" They all paused as slowly it started to rain for the first time in almost 3 years. The villagers all cheered and started dancing in the rain like children. Muojo stood back, smiling. True to his word, he had released the rain as his daughter was awake. Suddenly the royal trumpet sounded, and the village square fell silent. King Bamiwi and his palace guards made their way through the crowd. "What is all this nonsense I am hearing?" His eyes were like chips of ice as he eyed Akande. "This man has disturbed the tranquility of our village by killing Dagbororu. He must face judgment." The villagers all stood silent, but something had changed. They were no longer afraid of King Bamiwi. Instead, They saw him for what he was, an evil and wicked despot who had thrown Karumbi into turmoil with his misrule. "Atamba, arrest him now!" Bamiwi yelled. Atamba stood silent and crossed his arms defiantly. Bamiwi was stunned. He turned to his palace guards. "Don't just stand there, you fools! Arrest that man!" The palace guards did nothing. Bamiwi finally realized that something had changed and began to rant. "I am your king, the god's representative on earth. You will do as I say." Someone hisses loudly and throws a rotten egg at Bamiwi. They all laugh as it explodes in his face, slimy yolk and white trickling down his neck. "You are a wicked and bad king, Bamiwi. Plenty have gone under your watch, and it seems evident that the people tire of you," Atampa said. "Guards, arrest Bamiwi!" The guards grabbed Bamiwi, who shouted and raged, his crown falling and rolling to the feet of Akande. The guards took Bamiwi away, and Atampa picked up the crown and placed it on Akande's head. The crowd cheers loudly, and a refrain starts, "King Akande! King Akande! King Akande!" The next day, Akande was crowned the king of Karumbi. Over the coming weeks, he and Arike become close and fall in love. A few weeks later, they were married, and she became a queen. In a year, Karumbi recovered and became the lush, verdant land that it had always been. The cult of Dagbroru was banned, and no other maidens were ever sacrificed again. As for Bamiwi, he was banished to a place far away and was never heard of again. And that, my dear viewers, is the end of the story. If you enjoyed it, kindly like, share, and subscribe. Your comments are always welcome, so feel free to tell us what we got right and also what can be improved. Goodbye, until next time.